to have you all here today. So welcome everybody to our 2019 State of the Internet Insights for Jewish Organizations conversations. Really excited to have you all here, excited to have a good conversation. So my name is Miriam Brosseau and I'm the principal of Tiny Windows Consulting. Tiny Windows has been around since about December of last year. And we're a nonprofit strategy and communications consultancy here to help folks like you make the world a kinder, braver, more curious place. We work with a lot of Jewish organizations, but not exclusively, doing strategic communications planning, coaching, training, custom video, and some cool workshops. You'll find out a little bit more about that later. But I would love to hear a little bit about all of you. Thank you for popping your information in the chat. Let's see, we've got some great folks here. So Rachel, hello. Lisa, hello. Please feel free to pop in your name, title, where you're coming from. If there's something in particular that you're curious about today or what led you to sign up for this crazy webinar. Hi, Erica. Great to have you. Any ideas to share? Rebecca, yay. Excited to have you. Thanks, everybody. Please say hello to one another. Karen, another Becca. Amazing. Fabulous. You're all excellent people. Super excited to have you all here. Thank you for being part of this. Amazing. So please keep introducing yourselves. John, thank you. So here is this is a quick tip that, hey Karen, how are you? So this is a fun thing that I learned from the guy who wrote the book called The Coaching Habit. So I was on a webinar with him recently and he asked this question: on a scale of 1 to 7, how present do you plan to be? Because webinars can be like fun background noise, or they can be, I am so in this. So pop in the chat for a moment. Are you a 1? Are you a 7? Are you something in between? How in it are you? And this is totally without judgment. This is just to get a sense of where we are and setting our intention for now. So are you bland Lego guy or are you Idris Elba? So go ahead and set your number intention of how deep you're in here. Oh, 5. All right, great guys. 5 to 6, I made 8. Show rock and roll. Amazing. Set your intention. And then if there's something that you can do to help ensure that you reach your number, if you need to maybe turn off some notifications or close some tabs or doors, whatever it might be, then please go ahead and do so. Happy to have everybody here. All the numbers, I know. I'm mostly excited about Idris Elba, but you can be excited about the numbers. That's fine. All right. Amazing. Thank you all. Thank you for being here and setting your intention. Here's what we're up to today. So our agenda, we're going to talk about this report. Some of you know that we're talking about a report. Some of you know we're talking about the internet. We're talking about the internet through the lens of a particular report. So we'll talk about what that is. We'll examine 4 big themes that came out of this 330 plus slide report. And I'll look at a couple of grab bag data points that didn't fit into the other themes, but I thought were useful to service. And we'll do some takeaways and next steps. And along the way, please pop in the chat, please ask questions, unmute yourselves. This is a conversation and it's way more fun when there's, you know, both sides of it happening. So please do not hesitate to participate. So shall we? Janet, we're ready to go. Thank you. Let's get started. So setting the context, a little bit of background, what are we even here talking about? We are talking about the 2019 State of the Internet Report, or Internet Trends Report, which is produced every year by this lovely woman, Mary Meeker. So Mary Meeker has been referred to as the queen of the internet. She is a financial analyst turned tech venture capitalist, and she's been producing this exact report every year since 1995. And when she first did it, it was a huge event, right? It was pulling together a whole bunch of themes and things that people had been talking about into one cohesive document in order to share a little bit with other investors, which I think is a really important lens to have on this whole piece here. Mary Meeker is a tech venture capitalist talking to other tech venture capitalists. And what's interesting about that is that she is both identifying these big trends and then investing in those trends, and it becomes this beautiful virtuous circle. So it's important to note kind of the lens that she's coming at this from. She is not a Jewish nonprofit professional by any stretch of the imagination. So we're taking a little snippet of what she has offered the world and seeing what's most useful about it from our from our vantage point. So now that we've met Mary, let's meet a few of Mary's investments. So this is from the website of Bond Capital, which is her organization, her venture capital organization. And I imagine you'll see lots of very familiar names on this list, from Airbnb to Facebook to Instacart to Waze is one of the big ones that she initially featured in an earlier report in, I believe, 2011. And then that particular technology really took off after she talked about it. So you see that virtuous circle at work. So Bond Capital is investing in these different tech platforms that are, tapping into these global trends and then accelerating them. So, so just to again keep perspective on what we are talking about. Yes, virtuous circle as opposed to insider trading. Exactly. We'll put a positive spin on all the things today. It's going to be lots of fun. So this is also a super high level report. It is 300 plus slides. It is covering the entire globe. It is covering so many different aspects of the world that is the internet. We are not going to touch on all the things because mostly we don't care about all the things. We're going to take a snapshot of what is. We're going to look at a few small data sets. And the idea today is to help understand kind of the broader landscape of what's at work in order to inform your unique strategy. So I want to also set expectations here that the intention is not to give you a strategy, to give you a way to think about the internet and digital technologies for your particular organization, but rather to give you a sense of the landscape so that you can use that data to inform where you go. All right, fair? Everybody feeling good? So we'll zoom in on a few key findings, look at the data points, zoom out for some context, and then suggest some implications both on the conceptual side and on the practical side. So if you are just joining us, please feel free to introduce yourself in the chat. We would love to know who's here and continue the conversation. All right, so with that, we're going to dive into the first of our 4 themes, which is this idea of the neighborly internet. Is my cutesy little term for it. And this is drawn primarily from this snapshot data point right here. Could you, if you are familiar with a platform called Nextdoor, could you just pop in the chat if that's something that you're familiar with or have used before? Nextdoor? Familiar? All right, awesome. So Nextdoor is a platform that has just taken off like wildfire in the past couple of years, and I believe is also one of Miss Meeker's investments. So again, we're going to keep that in mind. I use Nextdoor Roscoe Village, amazing. Thank you, Karen. If you use it, you want to say a little bit about how you've used it or what you've used it for. Would be curious to know that as well. So Nextdoor is one of these things that Mary Meeker highlighted in her report as something that's really, really taking off. Nextdoor pitches itself as a private social network, essentially, for your neighborhood, right? So it's this platform that you sign on to. It sort of verifies where you live, and then connects you with people that are literally next door, that are down the street. I happen to be on Nextdoor, and it gives me, a couple block radius, essentially, for people that I can connect with and talk with and help find different services. You note that in their explanation, they talk about finding babysitters, local events, sharing safety tips, stuff that you care about in your neighborhood right now. And they emphasize this sort of privacy, this sense of close connection. It's super hyper local, and it's very user-centric and intended to be super, super useful. My neighborhood, 15% useful, 85% completely ridiculous. I imagine that's a ratio that is not unique to your neighborhood. Used for local recommendations. Some friends have used it to get tutoring and babysitting work. Amazing. Business services, delete a lot. Amazing. Great. Okay. So what is going on with the rise of Nextdoor? I would argue that there is a related trend that's happening that you may have noticed. Facebook has redesigned its interface, has sort of refocused where it wants its users to be spending its time around groups and events, which is a similar move here, right? They're looking at this whole world. Facebook is an unmanageable behemoth. It's a massive amount of users. It's been very hard for people to get a really meaningful experience from that news feed, which has really been the center feature of what Facebook has been all about for quite a long time. And in response to a lot of user displeasure with the way the newsfeed has, with what the newsfeed has provided to them, Facebook is now shifting a little bit to focus more on these smaller group interactions and on events, on the ways that people can connect more specifically to individuals who share something in common, as opposed to that whole big wider world of Facebook. So I think these are related trends in trying to take this big, unmanageable, unwieldy world of the internet and shrink it down to that neighborhood size to provide a user-centric, really useful experience. So with this particular data point in mind, I would say that this is an example of, the internet sort of tore us apart and the internet will bring us together, right? We've read a lot of studies and different kind of information coming out about how the use of digital technology is actually making us lonelier. We'll talk a little bit more about some of the sort of health implications of what's happening with the rise of the internet a little bit later. But the pendulum swing back is that people are really looking for local in real life relationships. And the trend is towards technology providing the means to support those local in real life relationships as opposed to being a separate other experience. And so we are also, as users of social media and different kinds of technologies, we want those relationships on our terms. We want the digital there to support those relationships, to vet the people that we're connecting with, and to track those connections. And so we're not keeping them in our head or necessarily in our physical Rolodex anymore. And I would suggest that for us as Jewish organizational professionals, some of the implications might be just listen first, listen to your neighborhood. I mean, next door might be full of crazy people because the world is full of all kinds of interesting characters, but listen to your neighborhood. What are people interested in? What are they looking for? How can you help? And I would also suggest that there's still, a lot of conversation around the Pew study and the implications that came out of this, the rise of the so-called nuns, the Jews of no religion, who are not traditionally affiliating with organizations, but are looking for connection and are finding it elsewhere and are looking for meaning and relationships and all of those things. And Nextdoor in particular might be a place to find some of those things. And I'll say there's actually, I have a small case study from an organization that Lisa Colton and I, if you're familiar with Lisa Colton of Darim Online, she and I did a small project with an organization in Denver called Mazel Together, which is all about connecting young Jewish families to one another. And in seeking out those families who are not traditionally connected to Jewish institutions, there was a peer leader who was on Nextdoor all the time, promoting her events and connecting to other people there. And that's how she found a lot of the young family Jewish community that wasn't necessarily seeking out formal events or formal connections to institutions. Are there other things that you would take away from this neighborly insight, the neighborly internet insight, or things that this resonates with in your work? I'd love to hear if you want to unmute or share in the chat, or questions this raises for your work. Let's see what we got going on in the chat. This feels like, oh, Lex, awesome. This feels like a great moment to name the beautiful shared roots that I've heard various folks cite a lot. Shekhinah, a name for God, is the divine presence, and Shechuna is neighborhood. Lex, you totally just elevated the conversation. Thank you. And Avi mentioned my neighborhood is dominated by a university campus. The students don't use it, so it's sparse. Right. Great. So it is all about, where you are and what's the audience you're trying to reach, and is this really an applicable kind of thing? Great. Thank you, everybody. WhatsApp groups versus Nextdoor. Interesting. We can talk a little bit about WhatsApp groups. Arnie, you want to say more about that?
Yeah, so we have a number of our professional networks and other groups, program participants who are mostly self-selecting and who choose to connect up and maintain their relationships through WhatsApp. So we've had people who've gone in a program 2 years ago who've opted to stay connected via WhatsApp. So I'm just curious what you would use either of those kind of tools for.
Yeah, so that's great. I think WhatsApp is actually really great for, whereas Nextdoor is more about kind of discovery and transaction. I think WhatsApp is better for maintaining existing relationships in a way. It is more private, It does have that sort of the moment feel and that rich media, which is really nice. It can be much more useful, and especially if you're using it over a shorter period of time, it can be much more useful than like a Facebook group or something where you're collecting long threads and it's kind of unwieldy. It's a little bit more of the moment. And there are also WhatsApp groups that function a little bit differently than that. But I think those are the kinds of things that could work nicely in tandem. You find the people on Nextdoor and bring them into the WhatsApp group for the extended conversation or relationship. Awesome. Okay, let's keep on rolling. We got a lot to go through. Okay, so seeing things, image and video storytelling. It's probably no surprise that this was a theme that came out of this particular report. So let's look at some of the particular data that Mary Meeker is presenting here. So this is a slide in which she's talking about users who are logging into particular platforms every single day. And this is capturing a time frame of about 18 months or so. It's really, really light at the bottom that it says Q2, Q3, these kinds of things. So across these different platforms, there are only two which have been able to increase that really core enthusiastic user base over that period of time, and that's YouTube and Instagram, which I think is really interesting. It's a really interesting insight just to like raise that up, but they also pair really nicely together. In a previous life, when I worked at the Jewish Education Project, we had a presentation from some folks from MTV Insights, which I believe does not exist anymore, but it was a research arm of MTV that was looking into younger millennials and Gen Z and trying to understand the trends coming out of that generation. And one of the insights that they shared was that a lot of the young people are going to YouTube to learn things and then reporting back on what they've learned and done on Instagram. So you go to YouTube in order to learn how to, paint the back of your skateboard in a cool way, and then you report back on it with images on Instagram. And so they tend to work really nicely in tandem in that way. So not familiar with Twitch or WeChat. So happy to share a little bit about both of those afterwards. WeChat is a little bit more, this is a global, report. WeChat tends to be more popular in Asia. And Twitch is another, Twitch, thank you, Shiley, is awesome. It's video gaming streaming, which actually, for the sake of the nonprofit world, it's interesting to look into how Twitch is actually being used for some really interesting fundraising events. But that's another webinar entirely. You can share some follow-up stuff about that as well. So we're also seeing a pretty significant rise in the stories function of these different apps, including Facebook, including Instagram. So across the board, this stories function, which is more about what's the of the moment, ephemeral kind of set of images and words and video that I want to share about what's happening right now in the moment. Usage of that sort of function in these different platforms is increasing pretty significantly across the board. And just capturing and sharing images, right? People are taking lots and lots of pictures. The camera technology on our devices is improving like crazy. It becomes the reason that we look into a particular phone. And the reason that we get upset with it. I'm getting a little bit of background noise from someone. If you don't mind muting yourself, if you've got shuffling around going, it'd be very helpful, thank you. And then the image sharing side of this slide is about Instagram monthly active users. So people who are, logging in once a month to actively share and comment and react in all of this. So both of these are increasing pretty significantly. And then the way that these image sharing sites evolve is also interesting to look at. So we take Pinterest, for example, which is, I think, one of those social media sites that often gets sort of brushed off to the side. It's not really in the kind of big 4 or 5 that get brought up time and again, but it's been a consistent contender as far as user base and engagement rates and all of these things. So whereas it started off, in 2011, 10 years or so ago, about more that image organization and sharing, it's evolved into image-powered search and discovery, and ultimately, leading ultimately to commerce, where a lot of these platforms end up. So there's ever increasing sophistication on platforms like this, and I'm also using this as an excuse to highlight Pinterest in particular for a couple of reasons. First of all, Pinterest a while ago this is still an ongoing conversation, but really at the height of the vaccination, anti-vaccination debate, Pinterest took a stand where a lot of social media networks have been reluctant to say anything in terms of their values or sort of their point of view on certain issues. They like to present themselves as a neutral platform, which is not really possible, but that's how they like to present themselves. Pinterest, at the height of the anti-vaxxer movement, essentially cut off all kind of communication and all content sharing around anti-vaccination, and essentially said this is not available. This is not does not align with the values of our platform, and is not sharing good, helpful information with the world. So we're just not going to allow it. And so now, if you go onto Pinterest, you can see that they're not actually allowing any anti-vaxxers to be able to share their information there, which is a pretty incredible stand for a social media site to take. And the most recent development from Pinterest, and this is an article from just a day or two ago, is that they're introducing what they're referring to as compassionate search. And so they noticed from a lot of their user data that people are, they're looking for wedding ideas, and they're looking for what they want to do for their kid's birthday party, and they're organizing their lives, but they're also typing in things like work anxiety or stressed out or whatever it might be. And so in response to this barrage of searches, they've decided to alter their platform to be able to offer these little micro moments of kind of decompression and little activities that you can go through in the platform itself before you dive into the pins. And so if you happen to enter that kind of search into Pinterest, the thing that they're rolling out is that you can do that little activity to help calm you down in the moment, because that's really what you're looking for. Or you can close out of that and go straight to the pins. And so it's a really interesting example of, first of all, user-centric design, and also kind of evolving your platform, evolving your offerings around the values and needs and interests of the audience that you're serving, as opposed to what you see as your core product offering necessarily. And thank you, Lex, for sharing the New York Times piece on Pinterest and the anti-vaxxer movement. Okay. So with that, a couple more things about image and video storytelling. So I highlighted this slide because, not just because it's about YouTube, but it's because about how-to videos in particular. So I mentioned before this research by MTV Insights about how teens are using videos to learn things and then using Instagram to report back on it. So the rise in how-to videos on YouTube has also been pretty significant. So we're looking at a couple of the bar graph on the right about education channel subscriptions is really kind of interesting. So Khan Academy and TED Ed and related courses are seeing lots of subscriptions and getting lots of viewers and getting lots of eyeballs. People are turning to YouTube in the way that we might otherwise turn to, our neighbor down the street if we need to learn how to change a tire or learn how to do our makeup or whatever it might be. When we have that moment of, I don't know how to do something and I need this information now, and I may be a little reluctant to ask another human being to teach me how to do this, YouTube provides that information immediately. And because our digital devices are so sophisticated and we have these supercomputers walking around in our pockets with us, then we can watch that video, learn how to do it in the moment, and then report back on Instagram, of course. But the rise of this educational content on YouTube is pretty staggering and a really interesting, useful insight. So here's a couple of maybe helpful examples, maybe not. The top image is from my friend Jason Silver, who's a dating coach and helps women attract great guys like all the fellows on this call. And then the Instagram post below there is from a drawing tutorial account that crowdsources and then shares great examples of how to draw different things. And so this is an example of an image that they shared of how Bone, which is a graphic novel series, that how they do tears in particular, which is just a really small snapshot, something very manageable and able to capture in a single image, and something that you can learn and take away into the real world. So I think all of this comes down to, there is increasing importance in visual communication. Video is crazy accessible and all over the place. It's not the expensive big production that it has been in the past. It's cheap. It's at the palm. It's at your fingertips, and is increasingly digital platforms are supporting video, even if they weren't designed for that initially. Also, this democratization of graphic design skills. I didn't pull the slides particularly about Canva, but especially for nonprofit organizations, Canva, if somebody wouldn't mind popping the link to Canva, if you're familiar with it, into the chat, is a really useful platform that is essentially democratizing graphic design and allowing people to create templates and to create social media content really quickly and easily without having any prior, graphic design knowledge or skills or whatever it might be. Thank you to both Shiley and Beth for sharing the Canva link. It's worth exploring. Erica loves Canva. And if Erica loves Canva, you're gonna love Canva too. See what I did there? We'll talk about recommendations in a little bit. And then also this idea that this image and video, this visually driven culture is not just about entertainment, it's about information, it is about skills, it is about gaining knowledge that people are hungry for in the moment. And so, to wrap up this section on the visual storytelling side of things, text-based communication, I think it's not a crazy thing to say that as much as that's deep, deep, deep in Jewish culture and in Jewish organizations, we are the people of the book, it's evolutionarily much newer than communicating via visuals. And our brains are just wired to interpret visuals much, much faster. So in some ways, we're getting back to our roots with going back to this visually driven kind of pictographical culture. I'll also emphasize videos and images are not just for entertainment, they're for learning, for connection, for sharing stories. And so practically speaking, I think this means really thinking about upskilling your team on visual communications. I love this word upskill. I don't know if anybody else uses it. I learned it from some Australian colleagues, and it just means like get better at. But thinking about professional development for graphic design, thinking about photography, thinking about developing your own sort of stock image library so that you can have really beautiful visuals that are truly representative of your brand and your mission and your community. It's a worthwhile investment because, guys, there is a sea of mediocrity out there. As much as I love Canva, it's also perpetuating a lot of like crummy design. And so being able to do beautiful things that stand out and show the humanity of your cause is going to be that much more appealing and is going to be that much more inviting to the community that you're trying to attract. And I would also say that especially when it comes to video, which is a really, really useful tool in your marketing toolbox, don't think about it just as marketing. Think about it in terms of what you can teach. What is the thing that comes out of your mission that would be useful to the people you're trying to speak to, that you can create some really rich content around that will both demonstrate your expertise, your unique point of view, and also be informative and entertaining and interesting and worth the time of the people that you're sharing with. And that's not just about video. I mean, those are sort of the principles of what gets referred to as content marketing, essentially creating stuff that's useful for other people that has to do with your mission and business model and all that kind of good stuff. But I think with video especially, there's a huge opportunity to tap into that how-to market. So reactions, questions, insights, what you're thinking about for your organization with regards to image and video storytelling. Anything come to mind? Feel free to unmute or share in the chat. Okay. Shall not fear the silence. We shall move forward. Amazing. Okay, so we've talked a little bit about the visual side of things. Video can be inexpensive. Thank you, video guy Jen. It's true. Or ramped up. There's a whole range of how to deal with video, and happy to talk more about that with anybody afterwards. But let's move from the visual side to the oral auditory side, and talk a little bit about podcasts and voice command. And these are sort of arbitrarily stuck together because they have to do with the human voice, so excuse the fact that they don't work perfectly. But I did want to highlight a couple of things with regards to this. So first of all, podcasts, and maybe Lex, if you want to jump in about this, please do share. So you guys were number 11, I know, and you just barely missed here. But so podcasts in general, they're all over the place, right? The podcast listenership has raised really considerably, and it's becoming a more accepted and more ubiquitous form of communication and sharing, both in terms of organizations and individuals and businesses, and everybody's kind of getting into the podcast game. And people, you say the word podcast and people don't look at you funny anymore, right? This is becoming a real thing in the cultural lexicon. And so just to give you some sense of that scope, this is not from Mary Meeker's report, but there are over 750,000 podcasts and 30 million episodes of those podcasts that have been created. I believe the average lifespan of a podcast is about 7 episodes. That may be apocryphal, but that's many of them don't make it, is my point. And podcast listeners tend to be very devoted. They tend to be really good listeners. They tend to stick with the podcasts that they listen to. They tend to listen to multiple podcasts. And what's especially nice about a lot of podcasting is that because it's just listening, it's easy to multitask. People listen to podcasts and wash dishes and go on their run, or they're, driving to work or whatever it might be. So it's the kind of medium, unlike video, which you really demands your full attention for extended periods of times. Podcast can sort of insert itself into different parts of people's lives in a more in an easier kind of way. Lex, I'm serious. Is there anything else that you'd like to say about podcasts, or do a pitch for Judaism Unbound, which everyone should subscribe to?
That's great. Only if they sign up for Throwing Shade also. No, this is great.
Great. Cool. And then voice command is the other side of this. So we talked about listening. Now let's talk about the speaking side of things. So if you have an Amazon Echo, if you have a Google Home, Alexa, all of these sort of smart speakers that are, again, becoming much more ubiquitous, this is rising really considerably. So the graph on the left is from 2015 to 2018. The rate of adoption of this particular technology is a little bit out of this world. Every time there's been a new technology released onto the market, the adoption rates get faster, and part of that is because of this network effect. I mean, as soon as I have a smartphone, it's easier for me to find out about the Alexa, right? And so this is a technology that's sort of woven its way into our lives much more quickly and easier than, say, the radio 100 years ago, or television 50 or 60 years ago, where the adoption rates take years, and now we're talking in terms of months. So this it's a more and more pervasive technology. Lex, please put in the link to Judaism Unbound as well. Thank you. And so I think the opportunity here is the human voice is immensely humanizing and intimate. And podcasts, both podcasts and this voice command world, provide a very different experience than, for instance, watching a YouTube video. When you watch a YouTube video, you see the number of views, you see the number of likes, you see the ridiculous dregs of humanity comments, you see all of the related videos. It's in this bizarre social media context that you can't extract yourself from. Whereas when you're listening to a podcast, or when you're working with a voice-enabled smart speaker, for instance, that is just for you. It is highly personalized. It is highly personal and intimate. And it provides a very different kind of experience than a lot of other digital technologies, which I think is worth noting, and I think is something that people are more and more hungry for. Voice control is also kind of a matter of inclusivity. Just the more that we start developing different senses and bringing those into, internet technologies and digital technologies and things like that, the more people that we're potentially able to hear from and interact with. So that's also worth noting. And on this theme, I think we're coming back to just the importance of listening, right? Listening to the people who care about your cause, who care about your community, and learning how to talk about it like they do. Because someday, those people are going to ask Alexa if they can donate to your cause, or if they can find out about the next volunteer event, or they're going to ask about an advocacy issue that your organization is working on. And you need to be able to talk about it the way that they do. And learning that skill now will not only set you up for the kind of voice-enabled future in which all of our homes have these smart speakers and all of our devices are enabled in this way, but it'll also help you improve your messaging now to be able to speak more conversationally and relatably about your work and about your mission. So it'll improve your current messaging, and it also helps with SEO, right? With search engine optimization, with being able to be found on the internet based on the way people actually type and talk about your organization, about your mission, about the work that you do. So there's all kinds of benefits to doing this kinds of listening and understanding how people talk about the mission that you're involved in, the kind of change you're trying to make in the world, and being able to talk about it like they do, and get out of the kind of Jewish organizational wonky insider speak that can kind of inhibit the growth of a lot of our organizations. And related to that, I think there's a couple of even if it's just thought exercises, even if you never actually do it, I think it's worth thinking about what skill would you create for the Echo, for Alexa, right? What would you like your audience to be able to do to interact with? What questions do you think Alexa should be able to answer for them? What game would you like Alexa to be able to play with your audience? How would you design that experience? And on the podcast side of things, don't think about starting a podcast. Think about starting a show. What's the show? Who are the characters? What's the fundamental what's the fundamental challenge? The issues that you're going to be raising, because anybody can start a podcast, but it's the quality of that content. It's the it's going through that story that's really that will really make for engaging content and help you find your listeners and find your tribe and connect with them in a meaningful way. Shiley says we have an Alexa skill for shytribe.org for area Jewish events. Shiley, can you pipe up and say a little bit more about that? Can you unmute, my dear, and want to say a little bit? Our tech team put it together.
Yes, we have a tech team that put it together. We're trying to be on the front wave.
Say what shytribe.org is first, and then say a little bit about the skill that you guys developed.
Shy Tribe makes it easier to find your tribe in the Chicagoland area to find Jewish events that might appeal to you. We have a calendar that aggregates all of them together. Our technology is actually really special that could be applied to other communities nationally. So it's going to be cool to see how we partner in the future.
Awesome. And so the skill that you developed for Alexa is about just like finding local Jewish events.
Yeah, there should be a way that you can ask Alexa what's going on in town, and it should answer it based on our online calendar.
Awesome. All right. Thank you. Cool. So in the follow-up to this, I'll share a little bit about Shy Tribe and help you all get in touch with Shiley for that and so many other things that she does awesomely. Okay, great. So our final theme before we get into some last nitty-gritty is we are always on connectedness and intentional unplugging. So here's the scary part of the presentation. So here's an interesting slide from Ms. Meeker's report. About a quarter of us adults are just online all the time. We're just always connected in one way or another. And it's more likely that we are that way if we skew younger, but there's no age demographic that is completely immune to this condition of just being constantly connected. And that has increased. You see over here that has increased. This is from a Pew study. And so I should back up just a second and say that Mary Meeker's report is a combination of some original research and pulling from other pre-existing reports. So this is from a Pew study. And the number of adults that are saying that they are constantly online has risen from 21 to 26% in the past 3 years, which is not insignificant and has a lot to do with the rise of mobile. And so the response to this, we feel this happening to ourselves, right? We feel that we are constantly picking up our phone every 12 minutes or whatever the latest statistic happens to be. And we're reacting to that. And so 2/3 of American adults are actively trying to limit their phone time or actively trying to stop picking it up every time there's a notification. And also to set some limits, set some controls around, if they happen to have children, around their children's use of digital and social media and different internet-enabled technologies. which is kind of a staggering statistic to think that 2/3 of us are, recognizing the addictive qualities of these technologies and actively trying to curb our use. Because we feel this stuff happening, right? On the one hand, there are enormous benefits to being connected to the world of the internet and all of the people that it offers, and sessions like this that we can only do because the internet exists. Self-expression, self-identity, community building, this third one that I want to emphasize, that people really in general, not just organizations, see these digital technologies, see the internet as a place to build and be part of and find something bigger than themselves, and to create that sense of meaning through emotional support, all of these things. This is great stuff for our organizations to capitalize on. And at the same time, there's this dark side of, if it's so personally meaningful, it's also really personally challenging. We're experiencing more, heightened levels of depression and anxiety, especially, and body image in particular, especially around teenagers and people of color and people of different abilities. All of this yuckiness is kind of coming out of the woodwork. This isn't anything new for any of us, but we feel this happening. And especially I wanted to highlight this last piece of sleep quality. How many of us are hanging out with our devices for an hour past when we would normally go to sleep? For how many of us is this the first thing that we see when we wake up in the morning? It's a real thing. Netflix sees sleep as its biggest competition. And this is from 2017, but it's a real thing, right? It's taking up space in our heads and in our lives, and it's preventing us from getting the kind of quality restorative rest that we need to do the work that we need to do in our communities and change the world the way that we want to. So there's always that balance. And on the one hand, these platforms are responding. They're seeing that their users are upset at how much time they're spending on Facebook and how much time they're spending just on their iPhone twiddling around and realizing an hour later that they've done nothing. And are responding by basically saying, okay, well, here, we'll name this for you. We will tell you how much time you're spending. We will tell you about your activity. We will build this into our user experience for you to at least have that awareness, and then you decide what to do with it. So that's one way that it's interesting to see across the board. A lot of the big tech companies are starting to build that into that experience. And at the same time, there are those who are like, that's not good enough. And these tech companies are preying on human weakness, and you will never be able to change them from the inside. And so I would also encourage everybody on this in this conversation to check out the Center for Humane Technology. It was started by a group of ex-Facebook and Google folks who tried to change the system from the inside and say, how about we not build these to be super addictive and burrow into people's brains? Maybe we should change this a little bit and be a little bit more cognizant of what we're doing to people when we build these technologies. And they found that from the inside, they couldn't make the change that they wanted to. And so they left and started the Center for Humane Technology, which has some really interesting tips on both personal and organizational level of how you can interact with and set up your technology to be more person-centered and to be less kind of invasive and addictive, and really be about moving humanity forward as opposed to just moving the stock portfolio forward. So with that dark side revealed, we all feel this in our lives, right? I'm not going to dwell on the conceptual side of things, but really consider your own usage, and consider, I think, for those of us in positions of leadership, consider expectations that you're putting on your team for their level of connectedness, be it, emails in the middle of the night or whatever it might be. Are we assuming that people are always on, and should we be feeding into those habits? And I think also, I say this as a parent and as a Jewish organizational professional, being able to model the kind of usage that we feel is healthy and useful and actually advances the goals of the community is a really powerful thing to be able to do. I think focusing on quality content is also really important. I think a lot of our organizations really feel the need to feed the social media beast and continue to put out content that is intended to work towards the algorithm, right? To go into the Facebook news feed, to make sure that you're at the top of the Twitter feed, to make sure that you're shown in YouTube or whatever it might be. And I would encourage us to stop creating content for the algorithm and start creating content for the audience. And the more that we can focus on creating quality content and then spend more time on the distribution and more time ensuring that that content gets in front of the right people and that they're doing the right things with it, that they're engaging with it, that they're connecting to the mission, connecting to the organization, it's going to pay off for both us and for our audience. And finally, people want their tech Shabbat, right? If you're familiar with this tech Shabbat concept, with the National Day of Unplugging, there are lots of movements around this, but we should be celebrating and encouraging in real life device-free experiences because people are hungry for it and our tradition demands it. So the places that we use digital to support and amplify those kinds of opportunities is really, that's helpful and great. But also consciously unplugging, consciously creating space for people just to connect in real life, one-on-one, in small groups, on a regular basis, has such value. And just because it doesn't have a number of views or all of those kinds of metrics that we've gotten so hungry for and used to attached to it, doesn't mean that we should be devaluing it. So I would encourage us to all think about that as well. Takeaways, questions, implications for your organizations from this particular theme? Pop it in your chat if you feel so moved. Feel free to unmute. If there are no comments, I'm going to dive into a quick grab bag of some other things that didn't quite fit into those 4 themes, but I felt like were worth surfacing. And we'll go through them pretty quickly. We got about 10 minutes left together. Thanks everybody for sticking around. It's been fun chatting with you. So she's got Mary Meeker has a couple of tips here just about like what makes good marketing and how do you get yourself in front of people in a way that, invites them to be part of that story, invites them to partake in that product or experience that you're offering. So she says effective and efficient marketing is your product or program or mission or whatever it is, plus happy customers. So that's the first step, plus recommendations. And this case study here is about subscription boxes, right? Where you mail out the thing and people get that once a month and they either take some, there's lots of examples of this. The one that's featured here is Stitch Fix. I said it right the first time. Is about Stitch Fix, which sends you a box of clothes that are, based on your fashion preferences that you've named beforehand. And then you take what you like and pay for it and send everything else back. But the quote here from the CEO is, what's really special about Stitch Fix is that 100% of what we sell is based on recommendations. Good old word of mouth, person-to-person marketing is what has skyrocketed Stitch Fix to its dominance of this market. And so they are providing a product that's so good and an experience that's so pleasing that people can't help but talk about it. And that's where those recommendations come into play. Another interesting tidbit in our grab bag is, first of all, and this isn't none of this is entirely new, but this idea of the sort of multi-platform, multi-device experience. The idea of the second screen was a point of conversation several years ago, essentially that people would be watching a piece of content on their laptop or on television or whatever it might be, and then on Twitter or chatting in WhatsApp or whatever it is with their friends while they were having that experience. And so the content became a point of connectivity in real time as they were going through this, but it allows the audience users to connect with people who are not necessarily in the same physical geographical location while they're going through that experience. And so 88% of people who are watching TV are using a second digital device at the same time. So everybody out there watching the Mueller report right now, 88% of them have a phone in their hands and are following the hashtags and are getting angry at everybody and like having that conversation. And this is just a reality now. We assume that we have these several devices at hand, and that's how we're spending our time. And just watching television in general has kind of gone out the window. So another grab bag point. We're going through them real quick because I want to get you out of here before the end of the hour. So this is a couple of examples in a long series of examples of how different companies are using internet-enabled conversation and engagement to involve their audience, involve their customer base in the design and development of the product that they are selling, and the revenue returns that they're seeing on that. So those organizations that are opening up their design process a little bit, that are listening to their customers' concerns, that are integrating that feedback quickly and meaningfully, are seeing that effect in their bottom line and seeing their sales go up. And so here, these are a couple of examples from Salesforce and Adidas, but Nike is a master at this. I mean, you see all kinds of organizations that are doing this as well. They have their ear to the ground of their user base constantly and are iterating as quickly as possible in order to integrate that feedback and then reflect it in the products that they're offering, both in the product itself and in the way that they package and brand that product. Okay. One last scary slide, and then we'll end on a note of hope. How does that sound, everybody? So this I found was fascinating. It was kind of stuck in the middle of the report without a whole lot of commentary. But this is a quote from Astro Teller, who is a contender for the best name in history competition, along with Guy Kawasaki, I think. But he is the head of the Moonshot Factory at Google, which is like trying all kinds of crazy stuff. And he is noting here that human adaptability is, has its own limits, but the pace of technological change is crazy increasing. And so can we, as biological humans made in the image of God, keep up with the stuff that we're making? And he's kind of arguing no, that technology is going to keep increasing beyond our personal capacity, beyond our communal capacity to adapt. So he's suggesting that, developing these skills is particularly important, like to be able to learn faster, to iterate quicker, and to experiment, which means getting comfortable with trying and failing, which means being able to take a slice of our work, putting something out there, maybe having it go really badly, but being okay with naming that failure and integrating those learnings into our work so that we can iterate a little bit faster and serve our communities better. So learning how to learn, learning how to design, and learning how to accept when things don't go right is becoming ever more important in a technological landscape where all of these other innovations are just are moving so quickly that we can't possibly physically keep up. Yeah. Hashtag failure club. I love it. I would love to join the failure club. So let's see. Arnie said, question for some point, we're considering podcasts. Best to do a traditional planning process with lots of focus group and other discussion, or jump in, try it, and see what the response is. I would say put a little bit of design at the front end and then jump in and try it. And part of the cool thing about podcasts and any kind of content creation is that you can put limits on it and say, you know what, we're going to do a 5-episode run and we're going to see how that goes. And then we're going to learn from that and do better. And happy to talk about podcasts anytime. Okay, so ending on a little bit of a hopeful note, with all of this in mind, with the, the vastness of the internet and our attempts to make it smaller, with the move towards visual communications, with all of these, amazing things happening, amazing and terrible things, we ultimately feel like the internet has been a good thing for us. So in this survey that gets highlighted in the report, most of us feel like that the rise of the internet has been mostly good for us personally and mostly good for us as a society. So I think that there's a real opportunity here just to find those points of light, to find the places where being online, being involved in the digital world actually makes us more human and connects us better and gets us back to who we are supposed to be as social creatures, as visual creatures, as people looking for a connection to something bigger than ourselves, looking for communities of meaning and all of that. There's a lot of that happening online. There's a lot of that that's happening in the real world that can be supported by our efforts online. And those are the good things that we want to zoom in on and fire up and blow up and really help our communities and our missions kind of move forward with. So final insights and implications. People trust other people. This all comes back to what is the, what is that core human connection that's happening? And at the same time, I know some of you are, our audiences are multitasking, right? We cannot assume that we have their full attention. So being able to create something that's really unique and interesting and aligns with our mission and aligns with what our people need, and investing in the distribution as much as we invest in the creation of the thing is a very important thing. Thinking about going back to our Stitch Fix example, word of mouth is enormously powerful, and that just gets amplified online. So what is the experience, not just the thing, but the experience from the first email invitation to the thank you letter at the end? What is the arc of the experience that we are delivering to our communities that is so special, that is so powerful, that we just can't help but talk about it and tell our friends and say that this is something that you should really get involved with? Being timely, the second screen is really important. I've dropped a couple of Mueller references in the course of this conversation, effectively killing the shelf life of this recording, but acknowledging that that's what's happening in the world right now and saying, this is how I'm going to integrate that, this is how I'm going to respond to that. So what are the appropriate ways that your organization can kind of newsjack and think about what's happening in the rest of the world that aligns with who you are and where you are now. And just like make your content mobile friendly. If you don't look good on a phone, nobody's looking at you. You want to make sure that you can encapsulate your message, that you can be bold and simple and clear in a way that people can take in on their phones. And that's just good, good design. There are a lot of things that we did not talk about. I will share in the follow-up to this conversation a link to the full report. If you want to dive into more of it, there's plenty of stuff that I didn't catch, and there's plenty of stuff that I didn't talk about just because I don't feel like I have the belly full of expertise to be able to talk about it thoughtfully. So I encourage you to go take a look for yourself and see what other insights you find. Don't print it out; it'll waste a lot of paper. But check it out online. I will send the link. Whew! All right. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. Any last insights? What was most useful? What are you going to be taking back to your organizations? What questions do you have? Would love to hear. Thank you. Thank you for being here. Thank you for doing the work that you do. Awesome. I will send follow-up, all kinds of good stuff for you to dig into. So if you are in the Chicago area, Tiny Windows Consulting is going to be doing a stop motion animation workshop. We're going to make stop motion animations for Rosh Hashanah, which should be really fun, and I'm super excited about that. So Arnie, come from Florida and hang out. Yeah, thanks, Karen. We're going to do a more focused one. And our next webinar is going to be next month. We're going to talk about animation. We're going to talk about visual storytelling. And so I'd love to see you there. I will follow up with the link to register for that. And what else? You got this. Have fun. Go out there and do your thing. Have some personality. Fail a little bit. Learn from it. Bring it back to your team. I believe in you. That's why we're all here. I'm going to share some more resources for you to keep learning about all this good stuff. Here are a few. I'll share this presentation probably as a PDF to make it nice and easy. And that's a wrap. So thank you, everybody, for taking a little bit of time out of your life and hanging out. I really appreciate it. I'm Miriam, Tiny Windows Consulting. Follow up, please send me an email or shoot me a message. I'm on all the socials. Please find me wherever is most convenient, and I would love to be in touch with any ideas or questions or things that you might want to do. But until then, keep fighting the good fight. Thank you for being here, and we will catch you next time. Bye, everybody.
Thank you.